Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, jump straight in, and pull out the insights you need.
Yep, straight into the stack.
And today, wow, we have quite the mix. I mean, we're looking at healthcare ethics, the real-world challenges doctors face. And then there's Niccolo Machiavelli.
It definitely looks like an odd combination at first glance, doesn't it?
It really does.
But that's what this deep dive is all about, right? Taking these seemingly separate threads from the materials you've got, unpacking them, and finding those core ideas.
Kind of like a shortcut to getting informed, finding those aha moments.
Exactly. We sift through it, pull out the key facts, see what clicks, maybe what clashes.
Okay, so here's the plan. We'll kick things off with medical ethics, the core ideas, but also how that whole patient-doctor thing seems to be shifting.
Right, the fundamentals, but also the evolution. Then we'll zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, the healthcare system itself.
Yeah, the sources talk about some major hurdles there. Patient safety, for one, and questions around medical evidence, how reliable it really is.
Big topics. And then we take that detour. Machiavelli. Power, leadership, the state.
The curveball.
Definitely the curveball. And finally, we try to tie it together. What happens when you put ethics, system pressures, and, well, Machiavellian realism in the same conversation?
What connections pop up? Or maybe just stark differences. Should be interesting.
Let's dive in.
All right, healthcare ethics first. The materials make it clear this isn't just, a list of rules. It's more about making decisions based on values, especially when things get complicated.
Yeah, and supporting growth, positive change. It's got deep roots, too. It goes way back.
Like Hippocrates.
Yeah.
That far back.
The Hippocratic tradition focused a lot on reducing suffering, but also, importantly, being aware of what medicine can't do, its limits.
Which feels very relevant now.
It does. And later on, you had codes like the AMA's, mid-19th century, starting to talk about broader duties, not just to the patient, but to the public, even suggesting patients have some obligations too.
Interesting. So it wasn't always seen as just the doctor's responsibility.
Not entirely, no. But the core, especially now in research and care, is respect for human dignity. The sources you shared really zero in on autonomy, self-directedness, and equity. Those are key moral guides.
Okay, we hear do no harm, non-maleficence, and do good beneficence a lot. How do they actually work in practice? Sometimes they must conflict.
Oh, absolutely. That's where ethical thinking gets crucial. Non-maleficence is sort of the baseline. Avoid causing harm, but think about it. Almost any medical procedure involves some harm or risk or discomfort.
Like a simple blood test.
Yeah.
Hurts a bit. Maybe makes you anxious.
Exactly. That's a small harm. But the beneficence, the potential good from the diagnostic info, usually makes it justifiable. You weigh the harm against the benefit.
Makes sense. It's a balance.
It is. And sometimes it's trickier. The readings mention the principle of double effect. This comes up when an action has a good intention and also a foreseen negative side effect.
Okay. Like what?
The classic example is giving strong painkillers to someone dying who's in terrible pain. The main goal, the intent, is relieving that suffering. That's beneficence. But you might foresee that as a side effect, it could slightly speed up death.
Ah, I see.
That's seen as ethically different from an action where the primary intent is to end the person's life. The intention is key.
That distinction is really critical. Now, something else the sources stress is the power imbalance in the doctor-patient relationship. It's not equal.
It's inherently unequal, yeah. And that's why ethics is so vital. It provides the framework to protect the patient's autonomy, their self-directedness within that unequal dynamic.
So the doctor acts based on their conscience, what they think is best, but they have to prioritize the patient's autonomy.
Essentially, yes. Upholding autonomy and ensuring justice are paramount, guiding their actions.
And this is where things get even more complex because your material suggests this whole relationship is changing. People seeing themselves more as the main health manager.
That's a big shift highlighted in the readings. More patient engagement, more self-management. The physician role sometimes becomes more like a consultant, an instructor.
Which puts even more emphasis on that autonomy piece, right?
Yeah.
Informed consent becomes central.
Absolutely. Patients need to understand their situation, the options, the risks, the benefits before they choose. That's informed consent.
But it's not always straightforward. The sources mention this growing tension. Patients sometimes feeling they have a right to demand treatments the doctor doesn't think are right for them.
Yes, that's a really difficult area. Ethics, law, resources, it all gets tangled. A patient or family might want something they read about online, maybe?
Yeah.
And the physician is stuck. Do they provide something they genuinely feel won't help or might even be harmful?
What did the ethics suggest there?
Well, the materials indicate physicians should generally refuse if they're convinced the harm outweighs any potential benefit, or if it's just unlikely to be beneficial. They might acknowledge a possible placebo effect, but...
But draw a line if it's actively harmful or useless.
Right. And resource limits are part of this, too. Those allocation decisions ideally need to be transparent, maybe involving system administrators. It's not just the doctor's call in isolation.
Okay, let's switch to another ethical cornerstone, confidentiality. Keeping patient info private. Super important, obviously.
Foundational.
But there are exceptions.
Always exceptions. It's a core moral right, usually privileged, but not absolute. The readings list some clear cases. Court orders, obviously. A serious risk to someone specific that echoes the Tarasov case principle, the duty to warn.
Okay.
Or for public health reasons. Think mandatory reporting of certain infectious diseases.
So protecting the public can sometimes override individual privacy.
In specific, serious circumstances, yes. The sources give the example of telling a spouse about an STI the patient got elsewhere. The spouse's right to protect their own health from a significant risk might outweigh the patient's confidentiality, depending on the specifics.
That makes sense.
And even everyday things like the care team accessing records or using interpreters, those are technically managed breaches. The key is minimizing them and ensuring everyone involved maintains discretion.
Got it. So that covers the individual ethics pretty well. Now, let's broaden the view to the healthcare system itself. The materials you shared point to some really big challenges there. Patient safety is a major one.
Huge. And the statistics are quite sobering. One source mentioned that even with efforts, something like 1 in 10 patients in NHS hospitals still experiences an incident.
1 in 10? Wow.
And maybe half of those are thought to be avoidable.
Half avoidable. That screams system problem, not just individual mistakes.
Exactly what the sources argue. We need to move away from a blame culture, pointing fingers at individuals when something goes wrong.
Right.
And focus instead on understanding why it happened within the system. Supporting staff to learn from errors, looking at the whole process. Errors often come from complex system failures.
So training becomes absolutely critical for everyone.
Fundamentally, patient safety has to be embedded in education from day one for all staff, right up to the leaders.
Leaders especially.
Yes, the readings emphasize that. They recommend integrated care models, getting different professions, doctors, nurses, pharmacists learning together, understanding human factors, how people interact with technology and processes, professionalism. Leaders need to drive this.
Okay, another system challenge highlighted is about evidence. How we know it works. Evidence-based medicine, EBM. Yeah. It's not perfect.
Right. EBM, often built on big randomized trials and meta-analyses, has been revolutionary, no doubt. But the materials point out significant limitations. Well, the evidence generated in trials doesn't always map neatly onto the complex reality of a doctor's office.
Oh, so? Doesn't cover everyone.
Pretty much. Trials might exclude patients with multiple other conditions or different levels of severity. So the results are for an average patient that might not look much like the actual person sitting in front of you.
Right. Reality is messy.
Exactly. And EBM often struggles to provide strong guidance on things like diagnosis or prognosis, or how best to factor in what the patient actually wants or values.
And this leads to a really difficult issue raised in the sources, bias. Bias in the trials themselves.
Yes, that's a major criticism flagged in your readings, especially concerning industry influence.
Drug companies funding studies.
Yeah. The concern is that studies can be designed, or the results reported, in ways that make the sponsor's drug look better than it is.
How bad is it?
Well, one source mentioned a striking statistic, specifically in psychiatry. Studies where the authors reported a conflict of interest were 5 times more likely to report positive results for the drug.
5 times? That's significant. How do they even do that? Is it outright fraud?
Not necessarily blatant fraud, though that can happen. It's often more subtle, baked into the trial design. Like choosing a comparator drug dose that's too low to work well, or maybe too high so it causes more side effects. Carefully selecting only patients likely to respond well, keeping the follow-up too short to see long-term problems, or cherry-picking, which results to publish only the positive ones.
Stacking the deck, basically.
That's a good way to put it. It can create this confusing situation where you have competing trials sponsored by different companies, both claiming their drug is superior. It makes it hard for doctors to know what to trust.
Yeah, I can imagine. And amidst all these system issues, the readings also touch on the human side. the pressure on doctors.
Yes, there's one account describing a doctor's personal experience feeling, frankly, miserable and trapped sometimes within the NHS.
Really?
Yeah, acknowledging the amazing free care it provides, but describing the work environment as tough, under-resourced, understaffed, a real strain.
Highlights that gap between the ideal of the job and the day-to-day reality in a stretched system.
It does, and it hints at things like pay not matching the stress levels. It takes a personal toll.
The sources also mention another change. Nurse prescribing. What's the take on that?
It's presented as having mixed views among physicians. Some apparently see it as sort of clashing with nursing's traditional focus on care.
Okay.
But others see the benefits. It boosts nurses' professional role, can definitely lighten the load on doctors, and potentially improve patient satisfaction, maybe faster access to meds.
But there are concerns, too.
Yeah, the materials mention lingering questions about trust in diagnostic or prescribing judgment for some, and how responsibilities get divided or blurred between nurses and doctors. It's an ongoing evolution.
Okay. So we've covered ethics, system challenges, evidence bias, clinician stress, and now we get to Machiavelli, the unexpected guest in this stack of readings.
He definitely stands out. But yeah, the materials dive into the prince, discourses on Livy, looking for insights on power, leadership, how states work.
Why? What's the connection to healthcare supposed to be?
I think the idea is that understanding these broader dynamics of how complex human systems operate states, in his case, might offer a different perspective on systems like healthcare, maybe parallels in how they function or fail.
Interesting angle. So, what did Machiavelli think a ruler's main job was, according to these sources?
His big, quite controversial point was that a prince's only real profession should be war and its methods.
Only war. That sounds intense.
It is. The argument is that the ruler must prioritize securing the state from outside threats above almost everything else. Survival of the state comes first, even over some internal issues.
Very pragmatic, maybe ruthless.
Yeah.
How does a ruler keep power in that kind of world?
Well, interestingly, one key strategy mentioned in the sources against internal threats, conspiracies, and such is simple. Don't be hated by the people. Keep them reasonably satisfied.
Huh. So even this hard-nosed realist saw the importance of public opinion for stability.
Seems so. Your relationship with the people is crucial for your own security as a ruler. He also had strong views on armies.
Right. Citizen soldiers over mercenaries.
Absolutely. He famously blamed hired mercenaries for Italy's problems back then. He insisted a state needs its own arms, soldiers drawn from its citizens or subjects. They have skin in the game, a real reason to fight for the state's survival. Mercenaries. Their loyalty is just bought.
Okay, now the really famous part, the controversial ethics. Cruelties well used, ends justifying the memes. The sources mention this.
Oh yeah, they have to. It's probably what he's most known for and most debated. He does seem to suggest at times that actions we'd normally see as immoral might be necessary for a ruler to hold on to power and keep the state safe.
Using vices effectively.
Kind of. Using vices well and virtues poorly, judged by political outcomes. But as the materials note, scholars argue endlessly about what he really meant. Was it literal advice, just describing how politics is, or maybe some argue a kind of hidden message?
A hidden message, like what?
Some interpreters, like Rousseau, centuries later, thought the prince might actually be a warning against tyranny, cleverly disguised as advice to tyrants, a way to expose their methods.
Wow, that flips it completely.
It does. And another point from the discourses on Livy, mentioned in your readings, Machiavelli believed republics, in his era of big monarchies rising, needed to expand to survive.
Expand.
Yeah. He saw Rome as the model. It expanded its citizenship, built a powerful citizen army. He thought smaller city-states had to adapt or get swallowed up.
Expanding citizenship sounds surprisingly modern.
It does seem quite forward-looking for the time, and maybe the most surprising thing, given his reputation. Free speech. Your sources highlight this as a core principle for his ideal republic.
Free speech from Machiavelli. Really?
I know, it challenges the stereotype, but the materials present it as vital, valuable in itself, and a sign of a healthy republic. He contrasts it sharply with a wicked prince who shuts himself off from truth and needs forced steel to be dealt with. In a republic, he argued, words, open debate are enough to fix problems, the illness of the people.
That's a really powerful defense of dialogue. Anything quick on handling conflicts.
Just one point mentioned, he wasn't keen on neutrality. Generally better for a prince to pick a side decisively. If your side wins, you gain an ally. If they lose, maybe you can still find refuge and rebuild together. Sitting on the fence was risky.
Okay, so we've gone from the Hippocratic Oath to hospital safety stats, dodgy drug trials, and then landed in Renaissance Italy talking about war, power, and satisfying the populace, trying to connect these dots. What does it all suggest?
Well, maybe the big underlying theme is that tension you always find in complex human systems focused on well-being, the push and pull between the ideals, individual ethical care, patient rights, and the, let's say, Machiavellian realities of keeping the larger structure afloat.
The structure being the hospital, the healthcare system, maybe even the state itself.
Exactly. Leaders in all those systems have to deal with power, budgets, competing interests, flawed information, all while trying to uphold certain principles. It's a constant balancing act.
You know, it makes me wonder. Machiavelli said a ruler needs the people's satisfaction to avoid collapse. Is there an echo there in healthcare? Does a system need the trust and support of patients and its own staff to actually function and adapt?
That's a really interesting parallel to draw. Is navigating resource limits, political fights, all the stuff healthcare leaders deal with, does it sometimes demand a focus on system survival that can feel quite pragmatic, maybe even ruthless, potentially clashing with those core ethical duties to the individual?
It definitely makes you think about the different levels. Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive today. We've looked at the core ethics in healthcare, how that patient relationship is changing, dug into system challenges like safety and evidence bias, and then threw Machiavelli into the mix.
Quite a journey through the sources you provided.
It really was. So what's a connection that stands out most to you? Think about all this. Maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If patients are getting more empowered, more self-directed in their health, and if Machiavelli was right, that leadership, even for survival, depends on understanding and keeping the support of the people, what does that imply for healthcare leaders facing these massive systemic challenges?
Yeah, chew on this. Does that intense focus required to manage the state, the funding, the politics, the sheer complexity of the healthcare system sometimes pull focus and energy away from nurturing that fundamental doctor-patient trust, from ensuring care is delivered ethically?
Is there a lesson from Machiavelli, maybe not about being ruthless, but about how absolutely essential maintaining the satisfaction and trust that the people served is for the system's own health and stability?
Something to ponder long after this deep dive.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us.